I'm a burnout coach, and I'm about to tell you why most burnout advice doesn't work, including some of mine. This is the episode I should have made 2 years ago, and I'm a little nervous to record it. So here's where this came from. I went back through my notes from the last year and I pulled out the clients who hit a wall in the middle of the work. Not the ones who showed up and finished and felt better, but the other ones. The ones who were doing everything I asked them to do and still felt stuck 6 weeks in. I wanted to know what those people had in common, and what I found was uncomfortable enough that I had to sit with it for a few weeks before I could talk about it on a microphone. By the end of this episode, I am going to tell you the one piece of advice I have almost completely stopped giving. It used to be in my top 5, and I will tell you why I pulled it. If we haven't met yet, hello, I'm Tara, and I help you diagnose your burnout, then fix the fit or plan the exit. Today, I want to talk about the thing almost nobody in the space talks about, which is what happens when the standard advice does not work on you, specifically you. So here's what I see all the time. Someone has been at this for a year, maybe even 2. They've already read like 4 or 5 books. They've done a sabbatical. They have set all the boundaries they can. They have said no to that promotion. They may have even quit a job already. They show up to a session with me and they say something like, "Hey, I've tried everything. Why am I still here?" And underneath that question, there is a quieter one that they don't always say out loud, which is, "Am I the broken one?" Let me tell you what is actually expensive about this moment. It's not the time or the money that you spent trying to fix this. The expensive part is what happens to your sense of self when you start to believe that you are the variable that doesn't respond to known fixes. That's the most dangerous belief in burnout work, because it's the belief that makes people stop trying anything at all. They go from actively working on the thing to managed survival. And managed survival is the longest stretch of someone's career. I have watched people lose a decade to it. And I don't want that for you. So I want to take this episode and unwind that belief carefully, because the belief is wrong. It's wrong in a very specific way that matters. Here is the reframe. The advice itself is not necessarily failing. The advice is answering a question that is not your question. So let me say that one more time, because it is the entire spine of this episode. The advice is not failing. The advice is answering a question that is not your question. In my work, I use a diagnostic I call the 5 C's. They are the 5 drivers of burnout: conditions, culture, convictions, choices, and capacity. Each one is a different question your burnout might be asking. Each one has its own answers. And when the advice you have been trying does not move the needle, almost always it's because the advice is built for a different C than the one that's driving your burnout. So let's go through them. First up is conditions. This is the structural shape of your job. How many hours it actually takes to do the work. How much is on your plate. Whether you have the people, the tools, and the clarity to do what you are being asked to do. If your burnout is being driven by conditions, the right advice sounds like, we need to renegotiate your scope, or we need to add a person to your team, or we need to formally restructure how your week is built. The wrong advice for a conditions person is almost everything in the self-care category. You can meditate all you want, but if your job is structurally a job for 1.5 people, you will be tired. That's the math. That is not a mindset problem. This one is missed almost constantly. Someone walks in burned out, they pour energy into their morning routines, journaling, and their sleep hygiene, and they get exactly nowhere because the issue was never their personal habits. The issue was the size of their actual job. Next up is culture. This is the organizational environment that you're working inside. The norms, the way decisions get made, how people get treated when they speak up, whether honesty is rewarded or punished, whether your manager is the safety in the room or the threat in the room. If your burnout is being driven by culture, the right advice sounds like, we need to figure out whether this environment can change and on what timeline, and what your exit looks like if it can't. The wrong advice for a culture person is anything that asks them to manage their own response to the culture without changing the culture. The classic version of this is, have you tried not letting it get to you? I hate that, by the way. Culture burnout does not respond to coping strategies. It responds to leaving or to a documented, sponsored change inside the organization. And usually the second one is the longer shot. If the air in the building is poisoning you, the answer is not better breathing techniques. Next is convictions. This is your belief or identity and your relationship to work itself. The story you tell yourself about what success means, what your worth is tied to, and what kind of person you become if you slow down. If your burnout is being driven by convictions, the right advice sounds like we need to interrogate where you got this story and whether you still want to be carrying it. The wrong advice for a convictions person is any tactical productivity advice. They do not need a better calendar. They need a different relationship with the calendar. Convictions is really sneaky because it often looks like overwork on the outside. So people get the overwork advice, which is to do less. But if your conviction is that you're not allowed to do less is just one more thing that you are now failing at. It actually makes the burnout deeper because now you are burned out and you are bad at the homework. All right, let's talk about number 4, which is choices. This is your sense of agency, whether you believe you have options and whether the options you can name feel real to you or theoretical. If your burnout is being driven by choices, the right advice sounds like we need to map your actual options and stress test them so that you can feel the ground under at least one of them. The wrong advice for a choices person is anything that tells them what to do. They do not need another expert handing them the answer. They need to rebuild their own decision-making muscle, which has often atrophied from years of having choices made for them or by someone else or environmental conditions. This is the C that connects directly to the piece of advice that I've stopped giving, and I'll get there in just a minute. Last up is capacity. This is the physical and cognitive bandwidth that you're operating with. Whether you sleep, what your hormones are doing, whether your nervous system is regulated, whether your body has what it needs to do what your mind is asking it to do. If your burnout is being driven by capacity, the right advice sounds like we have to address your physiology before anything else, because strategy won't stick if your nervous system is in survival mode. The wrong advice for capacity is anything strategic. You can't career strategy your way out of dysregulation. Your body has to come back online first, or every plan that you make will collapse the second you get tired. I see this most often in high-achieving women in their late 30s and 40s, and the cruel part is that it often gets layered with hormonal changes that nobody warned them about. So the body story gets dismissed as just stress. Your body is telling you something specific. Calling that stress is missing the data on the table. So we've got 5 drivers with 5 questions: conditions, culture, convictions, choices, and capacity. If the advice that you've been trying is built for a conditions problem and your real driver is convictions, no amount of repetition is going to make it work. You will not muscle your way into success on that. The treatment is not matched to the diagnosis. That's the whole game. Most people who come to me feeling like they are the broken one are people whose burnout has more than one driver. And the dominant driver is not the one that popular advice is built around. Popular advice is mostly capacity advice. Sleep more, rest more, slow down, take care of yourself, which is wonderful if your driver is capacity, which it sometimes is. But if your driver is culture, sleeping 8 hours a night just means that you are well rested inside a toxic environment. So here's the piece of advice that I have almost completely stopped giving. Find your purpose. I used to say it. I was wrong to say it the way I said it, but here's what I noticed when I went back through those client notes. Find your purpose was advice I had given to almost everyone in burnout, regardless of their actual driver. And for people whose dominant driver was convictions, it was sometimes useful. It pointed them at the right question. But for everyone else, find your purpose was a category error. It pulled a conditions person away from the conversation they actually needed to have about their workload. It told a choices person the problem was meaning when the problem was agency. It handed a capacity person another big assignment to add to the list while their body could not do anything. So when somebody asks me now, do I just need to find my purpose? I usually say maybe, but not yet, and not until we figure out which question your burnout is actually asking, which is a less satisfying answer in the moment. I get that. But it's also a more accurate one, which I have decided to care about more than I care about being satisfying. And here's how choices connects. So telling someone to find their purpose when their real driver is choices is just one more person handing them an answer instead of helping them rebuild the ability to find their own. It looks like coaching, but it's actually the opposite of coaching. Now, if any of this is landing for you, do one thing for me before you keep listening. I want you to comment on this episode or send me a message wherever you found me and tell me which of the 5 C's you think is your dominant driver, even if you're not sure. Actually, especially if you're not sure. The act of naming it is part of the work, and it gives me a real sense of who is in this conversation with me right now. Okay, now I want to talk about what to actually do with this because reframing without a next step is just a sentence that sounds smart on a podcast. The next step is small. probably stupidly small, and you don't have to overhaul anything today. I want you to go back to the last 3 pieces of burnout advice that you tried that didn't work. Ask yourself with each one, which of the 5 C's was that advice built for? Like I said, sleep advice is usually capacity. Boundary advice is usually conditions. Therapy and journaling are often convictions. Decision frameworks and career mapping are usually choices. And leaving a job is usually culture or conditions depending on the specifics. Once you can name what the advice was built for, you can stop blaming yourself for it not working. You followed the directions. The directions were just for a different problem. And that is information. It's not a verdict on you. The second move is to ask yourself, what is the question my burnout is actually asking? You will probably know. People usually do. They come into my sessions because nobody has helped them say it out loud yet, not because they have no idea what's happening. Once you can name the driver, you can match the advice. Or you can come work with somebody who will help you match it. But the matching is the part that matters. The matching is the part the standard playbook gets wrong because the standard playbook is mostly written by capacity-first coaches for capacity-first audiences. That's not a knock on them. It just means their work is not built for you if you are not their person. A lot of people listening have more than one driver, 2, sometimes maybe even 3. The dominant one shifts over time. You can have a conditions problem and a convictions problem at the same time and fix the conditions piece, then watch the convictions piece come into focus because there's finally enough room to see it. That is completely normal. That is not you doing it wrong. Actually, that's you doing it in sequence, which is how this actually works in real life and not in a self-help book. If the last year of trying things has felt like running in circles, you might not have been running in circles. You might have been peeling layers, and you just could not see the layer underneath until the top one came off. Give yourself that. So the next time you find yourself reading a piece of burnout advice and feeling that small private shame that it didn't work for you, I want you to remember this. The advice was not wrong. The advice was not for you. There's a version of this work that is for you. Your job is to find it. My job is to help you stop blaming yourself long enough to actually go look. If you got something out of this one, do me 2 favors before you close out. First, save this episode somewhere that you'll come back to. I'd bet money that you will want to hear it again in about 3 weeks when you start second guessing whether you're doing this right. And second, send it to one person. You know the one who's been at this for about a year and is quietly starting to think that the problem's them. That person is the whole reason I made this episode. If you want to start sorting through which of the 5 C's is your driver, I have a free Burnout Drivers mini assessment that I'll link in the description. It takes about 10 minutes. It won't solve anything on its own, but it will tell you which question your burnout is actually asking. Once you know that, the rest of the work gets a lot more honest. That's it for this one, friend. I'll see you next time. Take care and make good choices.